just wanna see the light, even if it makes me blind. I just wanna see the light.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is, thanks, Scott. Yeah. My name is Matt Blair, and my beautiful bride, Audra, and I are the co-founders of the Well Resource Center. So, on behalf of the Well, we are thrilled that you all decided to join us. We could not be more excited about what our speakers have to say, and ultimately our goal for tonight. Our goal for tonight is for each of you to walk away from here knowing that there are resources available to you, to your loved ones, and to your coworkers. We want to help combat the mental health battle that is becoming a virus amongst our first responder community in the city and also around the world. A culture change needs to happen, and when it comes to mental health, and our hope is that tonight is one of many conversations that will help be a catalyst for change. Most of you here have probably never heard of the Well Resource Center before tonight, and I want to take a moment to explain what the Well is, and more importantly, why we do what we do. A little over 2 years ago, my wife and I were asked to come on staff at the Branch Community Church, which is the church that you're sitting in right now. And I'm currently one of 4 pastors here. And the branch, here at the branch, and I serve as the director of outreach. Before coming to the branch, we spent 8 years working in the non-for-profit world in various different roles and discovered a passion for bringing resources and people together. Audra and I knew we wanted to create a non-for-profit that pooled resources together that would help with the needs of our local community and beyond. So the branch was generous enough to partner with us in creating what is now the Well Resource Center. We started by creating engaging environments using primarily sports and cooking classes to listen to the needs of the community, and we quickly discovered that in this community here on the Northwest Side, you guys are everywhere. Literally, okay? We learned that over 20% of Chicago's first responder community lives right here on the Northwest Side. Personally, we knew a little bit about the job. My brother, who I'm honored here to have here tonight, is in the audience. He is a Chicago police officer in the 24th District and has been on the job for nearly 14 years. So my wife and I are part of the extended first responder community, you could say. We understand that you do a job that requires you to see the worst of the worst that the world has to offer, day in and day out. We know and appreciate the sacrifices you make and the time that you spend away from your family so that others can be with theirs. We understand that in order to cope with the difficult things you see, it requires a sense of humor that most just don't get. We kind of get it. We're working on it. We also know that in order for you to do the job that you do, more than likely you have a mindset that is taking care of everyone else before you take care of your own well-being. Ultimately, we know that the job takes a toll on both you and your families. With suicide rates amongst first responders raising to alarming numbers, that toll is becoming more and more apparent. Support is needed, resources are needed, conversations are needed, change is needed. The Well wants to help with those needs. The Well exists to be a support system for you and your families, to be trusted, to be a trusted, non-judgmental ear. We know that trust is a hard thing to come by in this community, and the best way we know how to build trust is by presence. When you feel like you are failing or feel stuck, we want to help provide practical resources that you can turn to. When your support system fails, we want to be there to help build it back up. When I say we, I want you to know that the Well is more than just my wife and I. It is a community of people. The Well is a family of people. Community partners, donors, these speakers here tonight, all the people with the name tags that greeted you as you walked in are all here that are people that are with and for you. We are honored to have each and every one of you here tonight, and we would like more opportunities to tell you how you can be part of the Well family. So, in the program that you should have received when you walked in the door, there's an action step piece. Okay, that looks a lot like this. Okay, this little action step piece. What we'd like you to do with this is, in order for us to better understand the needs of your community and of people in this room and how we can better help each other, we'd like you to fill out this piece of paper. Let us know which of the programs we offer you would like to be a part of. We'll be collecting this at the end of the night. We'll have buckets at the end of the room where we'd like each and every person to take that piece and put it in that bucket, even if it's filled out. I know there's a name part and there's personal information, even if it's not filled out. I know there's a name part and there's personal information, and I know a lot of you have some pretty interesting nicknames. If you want to put a nickname down, go ahead and do that, all right? But either way, this is the best way for us to be in contact with you. Know that we're not going to be bombarding you with emails or anything like that. You'll be getting a personal phone call or email from me or one of my staff. That's just our way of reaching out and saying thanks, and also a way to better serve you, okay? We also want you to know that tonight's seminar is being recorded. The speakers that if they say something that you would like to hear again or you'd like to share to other first responders, we want you to be able to do that. So this is going to be visible on our website at a date to be named later. With that being said, what's going to be recorded is the things that are happening on this stage, no place else. Okay, so we want to respect the privacy of everybody in this room. Later on at the end of the night, we're going to have a question and answer portion, which we will not be recording. That part of it we will not be recording, and that also is to respect the privacy of everybody in this room. All photographs that are taken by our team will be used with the consent of the people in the photograph, okay? We realize that 2 hours is a long time, okay? We also realize that a lot of you are coming maybe or getting ready to go to work or that kind of thing, and maybe you're hungry. There's plenty of food here. We want to encourage you to go ahead and get some food. You can bring it in here to get a drink, that kind of thing. We will not be offended if you get up and move around, but just remember who you're in the room with. This is a antsy group that notices when you stand up, right? So just realize that, but the speakers, we want to encourage you to eat, and please feel free to bring food or drink into the sanctuary, okay? So without further ado, I want to start introducing our first speaker. You guys didn't come here to hear me blab on, okay? So our first speaker, even in retirement, is one of the most highly respected law enforcement officials in our nation today. Terry is a United States Marine Corps and Vietnam War veteran. He was a Chicago police officer for over 35 years, serving as superintendent for over 5 of those years. After retiring as superintendent in 2003, he was asked to come back and serve as the interim superintendent in 2011. He has lived with and thrived as a first responder and in the military service culture, and has a powerful personal story that he's going to share with you tonight as it relates to our topic. And all that to say, that's not the main reason that I asked him to come and speak tonight. Terry has been a trusted advisor and confidant for me and for the people that I'm closest to for more than 15 years. He deeply cares for each and every one of you in this room, and he shares my passion to see a healthy community of first responders in the city and in others. I also have watched his mental resiliency and action of late, as he is one of the biggest Bulls fans I know. And yeah, Terry, I thought it was going to go a little different for us last night, and I'm an optimist, so it's going to get better, I promise. So without further ado, I would like to bring Terry Hilliard to the stage. Please help me welcome.
Thanks, Matt. Good evening. Can you hear me? I came all the way from the south side now. First, before we begin, one thing that I'd like to do is really thank Jason and Luke for their service. This is the baddest of the bad, and I think we need to give them a round of applause and recognize them. Appreciate you for your service. The next thing, it's ironic that Matt and his crew would decide to have this gathering on this evening. As you know, we got over 40,000 police officers and loved ones and spouses and kids and mothers and fathers in D.C. honoring our police officers that was killed last year in this country. And you wouldn't believe it, but This is to say something when it comes down to suicide. I'm going to tell you a little story before I go up to that story. The reason I got involved with suicide and mental health and all of that, and I'm going to mention a guy by the name of Bill Powers. How many of you in here remember Billy Powers? You know, that was the one who really got me involved. One of the things that Paul Sale, who's the president of IACP, says, we have lost too many of our own of ours to suicide, and we must commit to ensuring better services and outcomes for our police officers across this country. Well, really, in the last 8 or 9 months, IACP, DOJ, and all the folks with the money in D.C. really recognize that we have a problem when it comes down to suicide. Let me, by today being that day in Washington, D.C., as if when I was superintendent, I lost 11 police officers. Really, it was 10, but Joe Earhart was 11th, and he was shot on our watch, and he didn't die until almost 5 years later. But I want to give the names to you just like they did in D.C. today. Mike Surielli, John Knight, James Camp, Sergeant Aline Stoffakin, Brian Strauss, Eric Lee, Sergeant Hector Silva, Donald Marquez, Benjamin Perez, remember that name, Benjamin Perez, Sergeant Philip O'Reilly, and Joe Earhart. Let me begin to say, Billy Powers, when I got shot February the 14th, 1975, in the left wrist and the right elbow, I didn't realize till probably about 3 years later that Billy Powers and his partner are the ones that apprehended the individual who shot me. Move fast forward, and I become superintendent, and I needed director of personnel. And I tasked Billy to be that director. And what I didn't know at that time, Billy Powers was a sergeant in the 18th District, and he had lost 2 young cops who went behind Shedd Aquarium over in the museum area over there and killed themselves, committed suicide. And that affected Billy big time. Made him a director of personnel. Billy came into my office one day and he said, "Soup, we got a problem with suicides on our shift." And I said, "What are you talking about, Billy?" He said, "Well, I think we've lost about 3 or 4 police officers within about 9 months." And so he brought it to my attention. I asked Billy, see what you could do to put something together. Let me fast forward. Got a call one night. I was at a really hotly contested community meeting, and I got a call from Billy Powers and from the First Deputy's office and said, "We got a police officer down in the 10th District. You need to get there now." And I'm thinking as me and my security staff are moving that way that we got a police officer down that's been shot. Mind you, I was in Vietnam for 13 years, and I was used to seeing people shot and some who got hit by fragmentation, some of the explosions over there. When we got to the location in the 10th District, you had big trestle, railroad trestle, and Billy came down before I went up. And he said, "Soup, before you go up, let me bring something to your attention." And I said, "Well, where did he get shot at?" He said, "He didn't get shot. He got sucked in by Amtrak, by Metro train." I said, "What are you telling me?" He said, "Benjamin Perez was sucked in. He was on the trestle, thought he'd moved back far enough, and then realized when that train came through doing 35, 40 miles an hour, it sucked him right in." He said, "We got a real big issue here," and he said, "You're going to have to be the one to decide." "What might that be, Billy?" He said, he's not whole again. We got over 100 body parts up there, and we have to collect them." And I said, "Well, he said, "No, we got something like 40, 45 command staff members here, and it should be up to us. Get the body bag, bring the Chicago Fire Department light truck in and let us collect the body parts. If you and the first deputy, John Thomas, would go down to the bottom of the hill and explain to those young cops, we need you to remember Benjamin Perez the way he was the last time you saw him at roll call, not the way he is now. And what we want to do is we want to collect his body parts. Once we get them in the bag, we'll bring you up. You can take and go to the medical, take them down to the ambulance and go to the medical section, the medical examiner. A little pushback at first, but with John Thomas, and those who knew John Thomas knew, he was very persuasive. He persuaded them, and they stayed there. We went on probably for about 3.5 hours collecting body parts. And then the fire department decided they had had a call and they needed to move their light truck to their location. And that's when I made up in my mind, before I leave this job, I'm going to get the Chicago Police Department a light truck. We took the body parts, collected as much as we could, brought the young cops up. They took it down to the ambulance. And one of the things that I told them is probably about 40 cops standing around, and might have been more, not only from the 10th district, but from the 11th district, 12th district. And I explained to them, I said, I won't be able to move with you to the medical examiner's office because, from what I understand, he has a young wife and 3 kids. All the kids are under 10 years old. I said, I have to go out and make that notification first. Commander Acosta and I. Once we make that notification, we have to go to Cicero and make that notification to his mom, his dad, his 2 sisters, and his brother. Excuse me. We went out south, made the notification, knocked on the door, and I see this young lady come to the door. She didn't look like she was past 18 years old. And I'm beginning to see tears well up in my eyes, and Commander Acosta told the lady, close the door, I need to talk to the superintendent. We went back down, and he said, let me tell you, superintendent, you're getting ready to give her the biggest, worst news that she ever could have in her life. You got to be a man. You got to cut, I know we're in church, cut the damn tears out and get yourself together. I went down to the car, got myself together, we went back up, and we told her exactly what happened. You could tell that she was in shock, because the way she was acting was bubbly and no tears coming from her eyes. After we'd done that, we left pure support with her, and we went out to the mom and dad's house out in Cicero. And as soon as we walk in, the first thing the father said, I want to see my son. And he spoke no English, so we had Acosta there who spoke Spanish, and told him, the superintendent said, really, you really don't want to see your son. He said, tell superintendent, and he came over and put his finger in my chest. I'm going to see my son. I want to see him, and I did everything I could talking through Acosta to ask him to wait. Let's talk about this later on, because the one thing I did not want to do is have this father to see what his son, Benjamin Perez, what was left of it. I noticed in the corner over there, I saw a young lady, realized it was his sister, who was uncontrollable. Let me make sure. Okay. Uncontrollable crying. And so I asked Mike Acosta, I said, Mike, is there something I'm missing here? He said, no, boss, nothing you're missing here. She was on the train when it chewed up her brother. I said, you got to be kidding me, Mike. He said, no, she was on the train. So we get through with that. We go back to the location, and one of the things we decided, next morning, going to have another 40 or 50 command staff out at that location. We had daytime and really collect those parts that we had missed. From there, we went back to 35th Street. And I'll never forget, I closed my door, and Billy Powers came up, and he knocked on the door. And I come in, he came in, and he said, Soup, you normally leave this door open. And I did, because I had a big cinder block, and when they built that building, if you put your chair, where's Al and his wife, you know that chair that I had, it would roll down towards you, you know. So in order to close the door, you had to put a cinder block to keep it from closing itself. Brand new building. So Billy came in, he said, "Can I close the door?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "How you feel?" I said, "Well, Bill," I said, "you know, I've lost 9 of them. This is the 9th one." And I said, "Not feeling too good." And at that moment, Billy Powers had made up his mind. He said, "You know," he said, "when you become a patrolman, you make detective, you make sergeant, you make lieutenant, and you make captain, you go to the academy for training, and you get to meet all the counselors and tell you what counseling service that they got. When you make commander above, you get no training, and on incidents like this, no one comes in to counsel you." And he said, "What I'm going to do from here on in, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to sit down with you for about 20 or 30 minutes, and I'm going to leave you, and I'm going to go to the first deputy. Then I'm going to go to the 3 chiefs. Is that okay with you?" I said, "Yes, Bill." Billy took probably about 3 or 4 days to get to all of us to make sure we had some counseling service. And that's when we decided to meet in my conference room, and he brought it to us, and he said, "You know, I know you've been through a lot of trauma since the day you took office." But he said, "When it comes down to our suicide, our cops who commit suicide, we need to try and take that stigma off of them when it comes down to going to see counselors." And he said this, and I heard 2 ladies from LAPD say this 2 weeks ago at a conference that I was at, that stigma that we put on our cops when they commit suicide, it shouldn't be there. We should judge them on that time when they first come into the academy up until that last day that they were here, that they gave the service to us. And I agree with that. And if I have anything to say about it, if I'm on the transition team, that's one of the things that I'm going to bring up when we go Friday to talk to whoever we want to talk to. This is a serious problem that we got. And guys, I just got to tell you, and I don't want to steal their thunder, but you're talking about 2 of the baddest. If these folks can go on operation and can come back and talk to psychologists or counselors, or sit down and talk to somebody about the things that they've gone through, and I say we as cops can do the same thing. And I'd urge you, everybody in this room, to pass the word. That's what we want to do. That's what we should be doing. Because if you think we got a problem here in the United States, I'd ask you to Google the cops in France and the cops in England. France have 5 times the amount of suicides among police officers than we do here in the United States, across the United States. Good luck to you, and God bless you.
Thank you, Terry. That's an extremely powerful story, and one that we all needed to hear. Tough one. Our next speaker joined the Navy in 2003 and graduated BUD/S class of 251. He has served multiple roles in the SEAL teams, to include platoon medic, team leader, ground force commander, and as foreign internal defense advisor for the Afghan National Police. He has deployed multiple times to Iraq, Afghanistan with both SEAL Teams 4 and SEAL Team 10. He is a veteran of over 150 combat missions. Chief Fenner ended his career as a training officer at Naval Special Warfare Preparatory School in Great Lakes, Illinois. He has been decorated with several awards and decorations that include the Purple Heart and Bronze Star with V for Valor. He also received the Expert Medal for rifle, Expert Rifle Medal, which leads me to the time when I first met Luke. Luke and I met through a mutual friend on a hunting trip. And I remember thinking, man, I get to go hunting with a Navy SEAL. This could be pretty cool. You know, I was all pumped up. And we were going bird hunting. So you use shotguns when you go bird hunting. And I remember when we went and we first started shooting, I remember being disappointed. he's not that good. I was thinking, I was like, man, this is not that great. And I remember thinking, wow, this is surprising. And I was kind of shocked by it. And so was the rest of the group of guys that were with us. And they started razzing a Navy SEAL. I, of course, did not. I appreciate my life and know what it's worth. And did not join in on that. But he started razzing the guy a little bit. And then, again, I kept my comments to myself. And I remember Luke coming with one of the better comebacks I've ever heard. He said, I'm sorry, the weapons that I'm used to shooting have a little more velocity than this piece of crap. May have used some different language. And then he looked at the group and he said, and I still own a few of those, and I want you to remember that. Safe to say that the crowd shut their mouths, and that he figured it out. He got a little bit better as the rest of the hunting trip went on. Luke has not only gained my respect as a hunter, but also as a man. He is a man of great character and is also a trusted friend of me personally and of the Well Resource Center and those we serve. Please help me welcome Luke Fenner to the stage.
I'm still not that great at shooting birds, so don't ask me to take you hunt. It's not that impressive. Go ahead and hit the slide. So what I'd like to talk about tonight is kind of the philosophy behind, changing an organization to, understanding that there's a problem within it. Jay is going to do a great job of talking about, just like personal level tactics, but I think ultimately we're all inside of an ecosystem wherein, if you're the only one that believes something, it's very difficult to convince them of that. So I started my career at a very interesting time, filled with a lot of transition because, there really wasn't a ton going on for the SEAL teams in the 90s. If you question that, feel free to watch the movie Navy SEALs featuring Charlie Sheen. They probably did do a lot of the shenanigans that were in there, but I'll leave that to the Q&A and for Jay to talk about. So things became very serious very quickly after September 11th. And so this is actually a picture from my era. I don't know if I was in this one, but everybody likes to look at pictures from when they were in there and assume that they were in it. So yeah, bald guy with green fatigues on. High degree that I was in there, right? So what we're doing here is known as the whistle drill. And whistle drill is a really ineffective way to get from point A to point B. There's a lot of army crawling and stopping and waiting. And when you win, the prize is almost being drowned as the waves come in and crash on you. So this is from very early on in the process at BUD/S. This is very early, like phase 1. And one of the first things that happens when you get to BUD/S is there's all types of briefs and presentations as far as what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And one of them was a supplement brief. The guys of Jay's era, they really loved creatine. I don't know what it was about that creatine, but it made them strong, but really, really slow. But everybody's kind of looking for an edge, and obviously it's problematic if someone's having issues during training and they're taking a bunch of drugs that the training staff doesn't know about, right? So I think everybody can kind of appreciate that. So on this list, basically it said you can take multivitamins, right? Like that was the nuts and bolts of it. There was a bunch of other stuff, and it was like, if you have any questions, ask the corpsman. And so I was like, I've really never taken anything, but maybe I'll take a multivitamin, right? Like it can't hurt, and I'm asking my body to do a lot, so maybe a few more vitamins and mineral might help me along my way, And I really didn't think much more of it other than that until one day when we were out exercising, the instructors were in our rooms going through them and, finding contraband. And they did find a bunch of, crazy stuff, whatever was hot back in the early 2000s, like ephedra and, I don't know, it was no explode around then. Whatever people were into then, right? That's what was being taken. And I found out that my multivitamin from Centrum happened to have ginkgo biloba in it. Shocking, right? Like that's right up there with creatine and any other type of performance-enhancing drug, right? So immediately we were beat on the spot, guilty until proven innocent, and that's, just the way things were in training. So weathered that storm and thought, oh, okay, they took the stuff from us. Maybe that's the end of it. That was absolutely not the end of it. So we got hauled in there and berated in front of everyone. And, you learn later that being an instructor for Navy Social Warfare is quite a bit of acting involved, right? You really have to convince them that you're mad about stuff or disappointed in stuff when it's the same exact mistakes that the class before them made, but they need to learn it on their own, so they need the full performance. And, one of the guys in there was just like losing his mind on us, and it's just, you guys have no integrity, you should all be kicked out of the program, and it was just like even over and above, what we expected. And I was like, wow, that guy is, a little bit unhinged, but I just kind of chalked it up to the acting, But again, we thought that was it. We left, and it was Hell Week, like the next week, and was lucky enough to make it through Hell Week, and the following week after Hell Week is what's known as Walk Week, and it's really the only time where the instructors are reasonable with you, and you are allowed to walk everywhere, hence the name Walk Week, and anything that you're supposed to be doing is meant to be therapy or recovery based. My class and our interdiction with banned substances resulted in a commuted sentence of being beat during Walk Week. And that was probably not that impressive from the instructor's eyes. I mean, they went and got the logs and all the stuff that we thought that we were done with, we got to play with a little bit more. And that was a rough, humbling day. But after the beating, finally they said, okay, that's it. We catch you with anything else, you're gone. Lesson learned, papers torn up, it's over with. But a week after that instructor that was losing his mind on us ended up popping positive on a drug test. So, as a young guy, fresh guy, and you have this idea of what a SEAL is. I obviously hypocritical, disappointing to say the least. And obviously as I've grown, I have a better understanding for what the guy was going through. He was a incredibly well-decorated guy who'd been to Afghanistan right when it kicked off. He was like the SEAL that SEALs want to be. And obviously had been through a lot and, was not really given the opportunities or tools to process what he had been through. So what it meant for him is that he ended up losing a rank and I think was kind of retired a little bit before what he was supposed to have been, which, is tragic, right? Like that's a terrible way to end a storied career. And, at that point, one thing that I picked up on was that one of the issues we had in our community was that these people that, were just the guy, it was very difficult to tell them anything, let alone that, maybe you need to talk to somebody. So as I continued my career, I continued to see more and more instances of this wherein there were people that, had been there, done that, had all the awards, all the accolades for doing doing these incredible missions, But they were obviously dealing with something on a psychological level, and it definitely hurt their credibility as leaders, whether it was, through just kind of odd behavior or, self-medication with too much drinking after hours. Like it definitely like sullied what a great person that they were. But the thing was, it was just dismissed because they were such a good operator. And what people didn't realize is they were actually doing them a disservice by being intimidated by them and their stature and achievement. But that was just one side of the coin, right? Like, we just had to work with this individual. They had a family, they had kids, so there were other people that were, having to deal with that pain that this person was going through. And, basically it boiled down to someone not wanting to call them out in order to try to get help. Go ahead and hit the slide. So this is part of the SEAL Creed. You can go online and check this out. It's much longer than this. I just like this paragraph specifically because it is kind of an accountability, cornerstone. And you can find this on any quarter deck of any Navy Special Warfare entity anywhere in the world, right? Like, the idea is that you're coming in and these are the rules that, that you're going to be held to, right? This is how you will be held accountable. And no one was really being let off the hook for rowdy behavior anymore. And a lot of that, had to do with how serious what it is that we were doing. And the other piece was, we couldn't be, the elite of the elite, but, still be going to jail or, this kind of boys will be boys attitude. Like, it just, those two things didn't work together anymore. So this definitely increased the accountability factor, especially for alcohol-related incidents. Like, people were not getting away with drinking and driving or drinking and, being stupid. Now, this didn't directly solve our PTSD issue, but it did close the door on excuses for bad behavior, right? So I think in any organization, you take the time to, set a formal standard. The team knows ultimately what they're being held accountable for. Slide, please. Is anybody in the room familiar with the term voluntold? Right, you gotta volunteer before you inevitably get voluntold to do something because it looks a lot better. Another interesting thing that we started doing is we would, after a deployment, we would do what was called a decompression stop. Jay and I's first decompression stop was, what a boondoggle. I mean, what a great time that was. But when I came back from my second deployment, we stopped in Spain. And when we were there, everyone had to talk to the counselor. Everybody. Didn't matter if you were out on every mission, no mission, some mission, just read about the missions when everybody else was sleeping. Didn't matter. Everybody did it. And so this level of standardization really destigmatized it, right? Because it's not like only some people are going to see the counselor, right? Like, it was everyone is doing this, right? So there's no exceptions. And demystified, oh, well, why were you going to see the counselor? Because everyone was. I had to. He found me. There was no getting away, right? Is this, I don't know, Terry, you might be like, is this something that is like a tool after a bad mission or an operation where everyone is forced, to see the counselor, whether or not you felt as though you thought it was necessary or no? Yeah. So I think that this is critical, right? Like, this gets the ball rolling, and I think is like that first piece in getting people comfortable talking to someone else about what they're going through. Next slide, please. So one thing that SEALs do incredibly well is they have the humility to learn from experts. So when I learned to drive, I didn't learn from a SEAL who was a good driver. We learned from professional drivers. There's, in the whole regimen of what we learn, there are definitely things that we are taught by other SEALs, like how to dive, how to do explosive. But so many other things were, taught to us, right, or coached to us by someone who was an expert. And if you think about, what we're trying to do, right, like we are trying to take this very large skill set, perfect it, and then turn it into a package to best support like a direct action, right, to go do a direct action mission. You don't have time for anyone who's not the best. You don't have time to be learning from someone who's not the best, right? And I think as we get older, we like trick ourselves into thinking that like trying to talk to somebody or get advice from someone means like you don't have it all under control. But if you look at SEAL teams, if you look at professional sports teams, what do they all have? Coach, trainer, probably a psychiatrist at this point. Like any of these things, especially in the United States, that's operating at an elite level, there's a team of individuals helping them be their best. But if you're just in a more standard job, it's viewed upon poorly if you need help to be better. And I think that that's problematic in our culture, that the idea of having a coach help you with something is frowned upon. And Jay will be up here to give you all the pointers you could possibly need on a personal level on how to, build that mental resiliency. Next slide, please. So this is interesting because we're lucky to be alive during this time, right? Like what technology has done for us is basically immeasurable at this point in time. And, medical technology has been along for that same ride. So what we've found in the SEAL community is that there was a lot of correlation between TBI and mental health issues. And there was actually data and science to prove it. It wasn't somebody having a bad day or I don't feel up to this, right? Like they're getting a CT or an MRI or whatever type of scan it is, and there's like physical proof that something is not right in there. There's a place called the National Intrepid Center of Excellence, and they have what is called a brain fitness center, right? Like what a novel concept. It's a muscle that needs to be exercised. It needs a level of fitness. It can grow, right? It's not a fixed platform. It's something that can get stronger and be fixed. And I think this was big because we were finally understanding that there was things that we were doing every day in our job, like explosions, right? Just even in training, not the enemy trying to do something to us, just breaching a door. These types of things were causing issues, right? They were causing brain health issues. And again, when you start talking about something scientific, it demystifies this stuff, right? This isn't your grandfather's shell shock, right? It's not the guy who needed to be slapped by General Patton. It's a brain scan saying, this isn't right. Go ahead and slide. So as I mentioned, there really are like two sides to that coin, right? Like there's the people that you have to deal with professionally and, they may be going through something, but, they have a whole other side of their life where they have to, they have a family that's working with them as they're trying to hopefully get better. And, as Terry said, we all know that there's, one outcome, that is definitely much worse than, the loss of prestige at the end of your career, right? It's you ending your life because you don't feel it, like that's the best possible option, and that's a terrible thing. Rob was a classmate of mine, and I had the pleasure of being in his Buds class, and we also went to training before we were in Buds. We were roommates, and we were very good friends, and we both just loved like the silliness and the absurdity of what that training was. So if either of us were ever feeling down, an impression or mocking of any of the staff always kind of, brought us back up to speed. Generally done in the comfort of our bedroom, not in front of them. But one thing that I really think just like displayed his grit and his ability to laugh. I'm sure when you guys look up, pictures of SEAL training, you see people running around with boats on their head, and they're doing it on the sand. And it's like, oh, that's terrible because sand is so hard to run around. Well, it's also not a treat to run around on hard pack roads with a boat on your head because it just beats your head that much harder. And it was like the Tuesday of Hell Week, and Rob and I were similar size, and we had spent a lot of time in the same boat crew for most of Buds. And when you're in Hell Week, crazy things happen where you're in boat crews with people that you aren't normally in boat crews because they're just kind of randomly grabbing people and throwing them in there, or just the next 4 people between you and someone who's 4 inches taller than you just quit, and so there it is. And we're running around, and we are not doing so well. And so Rob and I, kind of tired of putting out and continuing to lose, just start telling everybody under our boat to quit. We're like, you should quit, you suck, quit ducking the boat. And this is just like for everybody. Like we are just like running our mouths at everybody. We're like, we're tired of this, you guys are terrible, you're not meant to be here. Because we were tired. We were tired of carrying the boat, and we knew those guys weren't gonna make it at that point. And finally, that piece of hell ended for us, and we were sitting there eating. And it's like 20 minutes you get to eat, and I went off to use the bathroom, he went off to use the bathroom, we're just like slamming food in our mouth. And the instructors come by and they're like, all right, prepare to up boat. And I look at Rob and I realize it is just the 2 of us. And with giant grins on our face, we both reach down to grab this giant boat and like bring it up overhead. And we know it's like impossible to do, but we like want the instructors to see just like how ridiculous this is, that 5 other people quit during that break, and they happen to be in Rob and I's boat crew. So Rob went to the West Coast, and I went to the East Coast, and he ended up deploying before I did to Western Iraq. So a lot of these people that you hear, Chris Kyle, Mark Lee, Ryan Job, Jocko Willink, who's written those fantastic books. What those guys were up against out there during that point in time, that was difficult. And Rob was there for that deployment, and he came back, and he was definitely changed. And the sad thing about it was, he was just so concerned that seeking help would end his career that he never did it. And the thing about him being a SEAL that was, different really than anybody else is that his dad was a senior chief SEAL, and his mom was a commander in the Navy. So like anything being a SEAL meant to me meant that much more to him. So obviously he, he wasn't going to give that up. That was much more his identity than anyone else, So he never got the help he needed. Ultimately, he did get out of the Navy, and one night he just ended up killing himself just because he never was given the tools and I think the proper opportunity to deal with what he was going through. And it's tough to think about because I feel as though had we been further along in our evolution, I don't think he would have killed himself. I don't think that he would have felt like there was no outlet. Sadly, it was just kind of before his time. So with that, I hope, I've given you a bit of a different perspective on this mental health, and, it is definitely a marathon, and not just one singular thing that happens to you and you are damaged goods for the rest of your life. And, it's an exercise. Mental health is a lifelong exercise. Thank you.
Jason Redman, he is a retired Navy SEAL who was wounded while deployed in Iraq in 2007. He's also the founder of the Combat Wounded Coalition, a nonprofit dedicated to inspiring combat wounded veterans.
Everybody in life at some point is going to walk into an ambush, some sort of catastrophic event that's going to rock your world and have this impact on your life. The majority of people who walk this earth have never wrestled with an enemy combatant in the deep blackness of night. I was engaging the enemy, and then suddenly my thinking was very cloudy. And I remember in that moment, like reaching up to my face. The face that I had known was gone. All I felt was this hole. In the ensuing 35-minute firefight, I, along with 2 other members of my team, were severely wounded. Since that night, I know that I was granted a second chance. That day became a benchmark for me. It changed everything in my life.
And I saw these young kids coming in, and it made me recognize that I didn't have time to feel sorry for myself, because I could lead right from that hospital bed.
Regardless of the overwhelming odds or opposition in your path, you always have the opportunity to overcome. And I said, okay, let's drive forward. We can do this. I realized the mark of a man is not found in his past, but how he overcomes adversity and builds his future. Any wall or door or obstacle that you find in your path, you will get through it.
It doesn't matter what you go through in life. Adversity is adversity. We all live in our own personal hell when we're going through adversity.
And everything you do, once you decide that you're going to be a leader, you should be a leader of your family. You should be a leader in the community. You should be a leader in your business. You should be a leader of yourself. I love this country. I love everything about it. It's up to all of us to preserve and nurture the future of our nation, and to never forget the sacrifice of all those who have fought, bled, and died to make it what it is. And I truly believe it is that I overcome mindset that makes all the difference. And that is what that sign represents, and that unequivocally is how I have managed to keep myself moving forward and finding success.
Okay. So Terry and Luke gave you a lot of great information. I'm going to bring it down to the individual, and we're going to talk about why that's so important. I'm really going to try and cram a whole lot into about 30 minutes, because I know I want to give ample time for question and answers. I know you guys want to talk to Luke and Terry more. I'm going to just lay it all out right here. So the very first thing I want to talk about is this: a bad day. September 13, 2007, I had a bad day. Luke was there with me on that bad day. Very intense enemy ambush, 45 feet from the machine guns that had us pinned down. I was hit at least 8 times. Luke almost had his leg shot off. Another teammate was shot 3 times, and a very vicious, very intense firefight. And when I was shot in the face, I was dropped in front of the guys, and I literally was pinned down under enemy fire for almost the entire 15, 20 minutes before our team leader was able to run forward and get me. Well, I have to tell you, during that time, that 20 minutes, when I came to after being knocked out, I was literally watching tracer fire, which is our the enemy machine guns and our machine guns, belt-fed weapons, every fifth round has phosphorus in the gunpowder. So when it fires, it actually glows as it goes through the air, and it looks like a laser beam. And I remember coming to and seeing these laser beams traveling over me. And I had this feeling, this absolutely overwhelming feeling of just anxiety, of like praying this moment would go away, like I could just will this away. Like it would just go away. It was a bad day. The interesting thing about that bad day, it wasn't the first major bad day I'd had in my life. Several years earlier, I'd had a major leadership failure as a young SEAL officer. And it wouldn't have been that big a deal if I had owned it and just said, you're right, I messed up. But instead, I was young and arrogant, and my ego wanted to step up and make a difference and say, oh, no, that's not me. So I fought against it, and it led me down this very long, very difficult road where I almost got myself kicked out of the Navy because of how I fought back. And it was only when I reached this critical point where I was standing in front of my commanding officer, and they were talking about Trident Review Board, meaning the possibility of taking my Trident, kicking me out of the Navy, that I realized I had to make some changes. That was a bad day. Fast forward to 2015, I was out of the Navy. I had launched my own nonprofit. We were doing great things. We were raising all kinds of money. And I got involved in a project that spiraled down into a very vicious lawsuit against me and false accusations against me and my company and my wife even. Front page news. And here I was trying to help fellow wounded warriors, and I was put in this situation. Later, charges were totally dismissed. It was just an egregious allegation that didn't happen, made up in somebody's mind. But it was a brutal, bad day. Years later, I was running a program called the Overcome Academy. I'd worked with thousands of wounded warriors at this point, and this was a leadership program to help wounded warriors lead themselves out of the struggles they were having, the problems they had encountered, because so many of them were really struggling. And one of the wounded warriors we were working with that we really had to convince to come to this program got up, because one of the things we were doing was encouraging them to tell their stories. Because there's power in actually admitting that you had a bad day and talking about that bad day and owning that bad day. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But he got up and he said, I've never talked about what happened. And he said, I don't know if I'm ready to. He said, but I want to. And I said, well, we want you to. And I said, until you can talk about it and own it, it will always have power over you. It will always own you until you can learn to own it. And he got in front of us. He was a medic with the Marine Corps. He got in front of us and told us a story about how they were in an armored convoy traveling to a location when they hit a series of IEDs that blew up several of the vehicles in front of them. One was the vehicle directly in front of them. Huge IED that went up, lifted this vehicle up, slammed it to the ground, it was on fire. He got out of the vehicle, ran up to it, and to try and help being a medic, and the inside of the vehicle was on fire, but it had crumpled the frame of the vehicle, and the young Marine driver inside was frantically trying to get out of the vehicle. And this medic was frantically trying to get the door open, but because of the blast, it had deformed the vehicle, and the door was literally wedged shut. And this young medic, as frantically as he tried, watched this young Marine burn to death through the window. And he came home and he checked out of life. Not literally, but emotionally, mentally, and physically, he stopped going out. He stopped living. He hardly ever left his house for 10 years until he had come to our course. The point of any attack any incident, any traumatic event, we call it the X. That ambush that I was in that night in Iraq, I was pinned down on the X. That point of time in my career, when I got myself in trouble and I was threatened to be kicked out of the military, I was on the X. That point of time when that lawsuit was filed and it was front page in the news and I got dragged through the mud, I was on the X. And that young medic gave up 10 years of his life. And when he told me that story, it was like somebody hit me in the face with a bat. And I looked at him and I said, brother, you're still stuck on the X from that firefight, that explosion in Iraq 10 years ago. Not only are you stuck on it, you have chained yourself to it. There's so many of you in this law enforcement and first responder community, along with the military, who have had these bad days. And we carry them with us. And we try and tamp them down. We try and tell ourselves, man, we're these tough guys, you know? We're these tough gals. I'm a cop, I'm a firefighter, I'm a Navy SEAL. I don't let those things affect me. See, the problem is when you have a true bad day, when you are truly on the X, that event, it's like a monster that lives inside of you. A good friend of mine, a fellow friend of mine named Jimmy Hatch, wrote a book called Touching the Dragon, and he talks about that monster, that traumatic event on the X. It is a dragon. And the problem with dragons is if you try and ignore it, if you try and pretend it's not there, if you try and put it in a box and ignore it, at some point things are going to trigger it and it's going to climb out of that box and it's going to eat you alive. These X's, these attacks, I call them life ambushes. They're these unexpected moments that come along and will ever leave physical, mental, or emotional scars on you. And the reality is, you don't have to be a cop or a firefighter or a military veteran to experience them. Everybody in life will experience life ambushes. Everyone. They can be as small as just the ending of a relationship, and they start to grow. Divorce, life-threatening illness, or divorce, business failure, lawsuit, life-threatening illness or injury, life-threatening illness or injury to someone you love, sexual trauma, and then the unexpected loss of a loved one. One of the biggest ones I've seen is the unexpected loss of a child. But they come along and they hit you just like an enemy attack. The interesting thing is, if you are confronted with a major life ambush like this, and I was to hook you up to a bunch of medical technology where we measured brainwave activity and we measured heart rate, and I set you next to me when I was in that firefight in Iraq, it would look identical. Because our bodies go through it the exact same way. And even though you may not have bullets or explosions occurring around you, your mind has experienced the same amounts of stress, anxiety, and overwhelming feelings. Ambushes come in 3 different forms from what I've seen working with wounded warriors and individuals that have experienced trauma. The smallest level is the micro ambush. And this micro ambush can sometimes be deadly because it's the ambush of the mind. It's that little voice that lives inside you that tells you you're not good enough, you're not fast enough, you don't make enough money, you're the wrong race, creed, or color to do this, I'm damaged goods, whatever it is. And I watch people spiral down because they give in to this little micro ambush. They get pinned on the X. I've watched so many people that do it, and it stops them from moving forward in life. The next level is a mini ambush or a minor ambush. And I like to call these scheduled disruptions because they're not at the level of a major life ambush. As a matter of fact, if you were to encounter one, a perfect example that I see often, I fly all the time. I live in airplanes. I watch people melt down all the time when I'm in, when I'm in airports because the flight got delayed. And I always laugh whenever this happens. You know, when the pilot's like, ladies and gentlemen, I am sorry, I'm going to have you deplane. And people are losing their minds. And they say that little phrase, you know, oh my God, what a bad day. And I kind of laugh. I'm like, really? I don't know about you, but I don't like flying on broken airplanes. Pilot, thank you, love you. Because the reality is, if you fast forward 1 year and you brought up to that individual, hey, do you remember when the flight got delayed leaving Virginia Beach to Chicago? They'd be like, no, I don't remember that. I remember you melting down. No, I don't remember that. It's a schedule disruption. It's a minor ambush, but people allow it to pin them to the X. They will allow it to impact their entire week. They'll carry this negativity and allow it to impact everybody around them. And then, of course, there's the major life ambushes. The average human being will go through 5 major life ambushes in their lives. One of those major things that I talked about. I've been through 3. I got more coming. Some of you may be going through one right now as I speak. And tonight I want to quickly go through how we deal with these things. The bottom line is, when you're on the X, whether it's a micro, a mini, or a major life ambush, whether you're in an enemy firefight, whatever's happening, you have to get off the X as quickly as possible. That is how Luke and I survived that night. These guys did an amazing job of fighting back. We had an AC-130 gunship aircraft up overhead that enabled us to take out the enemy, and we were able to get off the X. But you have to be able to do the same. We talk about coaches. We talk about other people around us. At the end of the day, though, you have to be the one that takes that initial action. You have to be the one that confronts that dragon. You have to be the one that acknowledges there is a problem. Because I could give you the greatest coaches and psychologists and counselors in the world. But until you're willing to acknowledge you are on the X and ready to move off of it, it doesn't matter. So this starts with you. We created an acronym. All of this is deep and in much more detail in my new book. But the acronym is REACT. Why did we create an acronym? Because I come from the military. We have an acronym for everything. Like literally as an officer, I went to a school for 6 months learning how to create acronyms. That's not true. I made that up. But why acronyms are great because they enable us to remember something in a sequence. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to give people a tool that it didn't matter what kind of life ambush they were in, minor, major, or a mini, they could use this tool. And the great thing about it, if you ever find yourself in a real-world firefight, it works for that too. So the very first thing we have to do is we have to recognize. This is the very first thing. You have to admit, I am in a crisis. I am in an ambush. I have had a traumatic incident happen, and I can't just hide from it. Because so many people, when one of these things happen, they are in denial, and they want to avoid it. And they box that dragon up and put him in the closet, and they self-medicate or risky behaviors or do anything to avoid it. You can't move off the X until you can acknowledge, I am in an ambush. So this is the most critical factor, number one, you have to recognize, I am in this ambush. Sometimes we need other people to help us do that. Teammates, friends, family, to be able to say, hey man, I've kind of noticed things, behaviors, brother. Your drinking's really heavy. You know, is everything okay? You know, sometimes we have to coax people off the X, and sometimes we have to choke people out and drag them off the X. But that's okay. You know, we need to help them recognize that, hey man, you got a dragon in your closet. It's going to eat you. Number two, you've got to evaluate. Once you identify the fact, I am in an ambush, you've got to evaluate what your assets are. Who's around you, your friends, the resources you have, what can you do? Counselors, psychologists, churches, whatever it is, what do you have at your disposal that you can utilize to start moving you forward? Number 3, now that you've identified what you have to decide what are your best options. What's the outcomes that would be best for you to move forward? And one of the things that sometimes we have to recognize, oftentimes in an ambush, it will get worse before it gets better. You may have to go through hell confronting that dragon before you will subdue him and own him. And that's a hard thing. It pins people to the X oftentimes. And the last, or number 4, C, you have to choose what's going to be the best path. A lot of people start looking at all their options. They don't choose. And number 2, you have to communicate it to someone else. Oftentimes when an ambush occurs, it's almost never that it only impacts one person. Oftentimes when any kind of ambush occurs, it impacts the people around you. If it's a business failure, a business ambush, it impacts your employees. If you're on law enforcement or fire and some sort of traumatic event occurs, it impacts the people around you. It impacts your family. When these things occur, you have to communicate to them, this is where we are going to go. You. Starts with you. By doing this, it now provides a level of accountability. People know this is where we're going, and it gives them a direction on where they want to go. And the last one, got to execute the plan. So many people in ambushes, especially major life ambush, who are pinned on the X, they want to get off of it. They will talk all day long about what direction they want to go, what assets they have, and they will never execute that plan. They will sit there forever waiting for the perfect moment as they slowly spiral down. You see, the X is like quicksand. The longer you sit on it, the more it's going to pull you down. The faster you get off it, the quicker you can start moving forward, addressing those things. Movement is life. It was life in ambushes. It was one of the biggest things we were taught. If you were in an ambush, you had to get off the X. And I tell you what, life ambushes are exactly the same. That should become your new motto. If you're dealing with somebody that's in an ambush, it should immediately be, hey, brother, hey, sister, hey, man, we got to get off the X. You got to move forward. That young medic, after our course, started to get off the X. Because you see, so many people will wither and die. But the faster you get off the X, you can not only survive it, but you can thrive from it. So how do we do this? Now that we've gotten off it, what makes the difference? So many people would say to me after this firefight that I got all shot up in, I put that sign on the door. I had so many friends that came to me and they'd be like, Jay, man, you are just, dude, you like launched off the X, man. I mean, the sign on the door, and you started your own nonprofit, and you're helping all these wounded warriors. How'd you do it? And I'd always go, yeah, man, it's the overcome mindset. You know, it's the overcome mindset. That's it. And they go, well, what is that? And I'm like, well, it's your ability to overcome. And I'll be honest, for 5 years after I got out in the military, I would talk about the overcome mindset. And there is a tangible element to it. It is the no quit, drive forward. If there's an obstacle in your path, you go over it, under it, around it, or through it. All that applies. But the reality is, as I really started to dig into the different life ambushes I'd been through, I realized that there were certain factors that applied. There were certain things that I had in my life at that time that made a difference. And in other ambushes that I had been in, both the lawsuit and my leadership failure, I didn't have these things. I call these things the Pentagon of peak performance. There are 5 key areas that I tell people you have to lead yourself in order to have balance. And I realized that after my firefight, after I was wounded, I was critically strong in every one of these areas. And that's what enabled me to launch from that firefight, when so many of my other friends were still fighting that dragon. I squashed that guy right from the get-go. And it was because of this. So that's what I want to talk about in these last 10 minutes before we get into question and answer. So the first level is physical leadership. So many people, when they have a life ambush, it actually ends up being one of the first things that goes away. As a matter of fact, the older we get, the more we start to ignore this machine we walk around in. And it's always fascinating to me working with law enforcement and the fire service, how quite a few of them do the same thing. Even in military members. I watch our military members in our Wounded Warrior community. One of the number one plagues, I talked to one of the guys from the Wounded Warrior Project recently, one of the number one plagues of our Wounded Warriors is obesity. They're getting out and they just stop working out or doing anything. I'm not telling you you need to look like something off the cover of Muscle and Fitness, but what we have come to understand is that this machine you walk around in, it handles stress and problems and everything so much better when we keep it at a high level, when we're at least moving every day, when we're watching the amount of alcohol and whatever else we're putting into ourselves, and when we're trying to get good sleep. That night that I was wounded, I was in the best shape of my life. I was training to move on to the next level SEAL team. Those of us who are over there, I know I worked out with Luke on a regular basis. I mean, we had a pretty fierce workout routine going for all those guys, and literally I was in the best shape of my life. The doctors told me it was a miracle I survived from the amount of blood I lost. So it is one of the most basic levels. If you are in a life ambush, get out and start moving. It's going to release the endorphins. It's going to release the things within your body that can help you move forward. It's going to flush that waste inside your mind. Remember I talked about movement is life? It's the most basic level. Number 2, mental leadership. Mental leadership is our ability to continue to educate ourselves, to push outside of our comfort zone, to continue to seek others who can help us be better. I had been on an incredible journey. That picture is when I graduated from U.S. Army Ranger School. After I almost got myself kicked out, I had the lovely opportunity of going to this great vacation called Ranger School. It's awesome. I highly recommend it. If any of you guys were like thinking of a cruise, or maybe you wanted to go to like the Bahamas, just go to Ranger School. It's awesome. Friendly instructors who will give you great workouts, words of encouragement, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Greatest weight loss program in the country. Jenny Craig, eat your heart out. Average person loses about 50 pounds during Ranger School. When I went through Ranger School, it taught me a lot about myself. It taught me a lot about how I needed to reach out to others. Prior to going to Ranger School, I hit the lowest point of my life. That time when I was told that they were going to potentially take my Trident, and that there were potentially, there were guys that were like, hey, you should kick him out of the Navy. It was the absolute lowest point of my life. Way beyond the lawsuit, way beyond my injuries on the battlefield. After I left that meeting where they told me that, I went back to my room. We're always armed overseas. This was in Afghanistan. I went back to my room and I pulled my pistol out and I put it in my mouth and thought about blowing my brains out. And the only thing that stopped me is on the table was a picture of my wife and kids. And I thought, man, what kind of guy am I to quit and leave that behind, leave that burden on my wife and kids? And I got up and I said, I need help. And I went and sought out the chaplain. That's mental leadership. It is recognizing I'm on the X. I need help. Number 3, emotional leadership. Climbing out of that hole from that moment in my room where I put a pistol in my mouth to several years later being severely injured, I had learned to manage my emotions. And so many other people I watched, they let their emotions manage them. Especially when you're on the X. We let our emotions dictate what's going on, who we surround ourselves with, what kind of negative energy we allow to be around us. And oftentimes it keeps us on the X. I chose early on that I was going to choose positivity over negativity. I was thankful to be alive. I was thankful that I could keep going forward. It is a choice. It is a choice to choose positivity. Is it a choice to choose positive people around you? It is a choice to surround, whether you're going to surround yourself with negative energy or not. I don't watch the news anymore. Not at all. Nothing but negative energy. Especially when you work in a job where you already are inundated with enough negative energy as it is. You got to find that balance. When I laid in that hospital bed, I had some people come into my room, and they talked about what a shame. I kind of started to drift off, in that subconscious state where you're still awake, but you're kind of half asleep, but you can hear conversations, you can hear TV in the background. And they thought I was sleeping, and they had this conversation about what a pity, what a shame. We send these young men and women off to war, and they come back broken and battered. They'll never be the same. They'll never be functioning members of society. What a waste. And they left. And that stewed inside my head. And the more I thought about it, the more I woke up and the angrier I got. And I realized in that moment I had a choice. I could accept what they said, which so many people do, and just chain myself to the X and said, I'm a victim. Or I could choose to move past it. Remember, it comes down to you. It comes down to you. You have to make the choice. You can have all the people around you that can help you, but it comes down to you. And in that moment, I made that choice. I said, no way. I refuse to have pity for myself. I will not let anybody else have it. And I wrote out that sign. And the sign said, attention to all who enter here. If you're coming to this room with sadness or sorrow, don't bother. The wounds that I received, I got in a job that I love, doing it for people that I love, defending the freedom of a country I deeply love. I'll make a full recovery. What is full, that is the absolute utmost physically, I have the ability to recover. And I'm going to push that about 20% further through sheer mental tenacity. This room you're about to enter is a room of fun, optimism, and intense rapid regrowth. If you're not prepared for that, go elsewhere. Don't come in my room. And we signed it, the management, because it made sense. The bottom line is this. It is a choice in these moments. We are inundated with negativity. We're inundated with these traumatic events. They live inside our brains, and they hold us to that X. But the only thing that's keeping you on that X is you. You can move past it. You can choose positivity. And the great thing about choosing positivity is it impacts all the people around you. That sign has gone on to impact hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions of people. So many wounded warriors have written me. So many people with cancer have said they put that sign on the door. President Bush invited me to the White House to meet him. Bob Gates wrote about it in his book. Michelle Obama wrote about it twice in her book. Not only in the book, she wrote about it in the epilogue. This is the impact that you can have by choosing that moment. Number 4, social leadership. The circle of people you have around you and how you choose who you surround yourself with is social leadership. If you surround yourself with negative people, you cannot help but be negative. If you surround yourself with positive people, they will help you lift you up. So you've got to invest time in the circle of people around you. That's social leadership, in your friends, in your family. Because I tell you what, when these moments come, they're going to make all the difference. They're the ones that can help get you off the X. My social leadership was so rock solid strong after I had made this crazy journey from, disgruntled pariah leader to redeeming myself and being respected with my teammates, rock solid with my family. So it's critical you have to take care of those things because you never know when a life ambush is coming. We never know. They're around the corner. So build that. Take care of your social leadership. And the last one is spiritual leadership. And I meet a lot of people that this one, they get a little, that's like New Age, or maybe they don't like religion, or they don't like this idea of meditation. And I'll be honest, I grew up as in a very religious home, but some of the other stuff that was out there, I didn't really buy into. These ideas of affirmations and positivity and how we do these things, meditation, mantras, things like that, they work. They work. But the biggest thing about spiritual leadership, I'll tell you, if you don't want to buy into any of that, is spiritual leadership is your ability to get outside of yourself and to realize there's a bigger world, and to realize that the problems you have, you are not alone. You are not isolated. Somebody else out there has bigger problems than you do. And if you can get out there and see other people and their problems and help them, it gives you power. That's exactly what I was trying to do with that young medic who watched his teammate burn alive, to recognize there was power in his story, that he could take that pain and suffering, that time on the X, and help someone else. That's spiritual leadership. Embrace it. If you can lead yourself in those 5 areas, it will make all the difference in the world. At the times in my life, the other 2 times, the lawsuit and my leadership failure, I wasn't strong in all 5 areas, 3 at best. And I really struggled to get off the X on both of those. It took me months. That's the essence of the Overcome Mindset, is learning to be strong, find balance in these 5 areas. Imagine it, as you will, a table. A table with only 2 legs, or 1 leg, absolutely cannot stand. A table with 3 legs can stand, but it's pretty easy to tip over. 4-legged table, pretty solid. Try and flip over a very heavy top, solid 5-legged table. It takes a lot of strength and effort because it's grounded, it's rooted. This is what you need in order to encounter these life ambushes and deal with that trauma. So we're going to get into this. I'm going to wrap this up. If you like what I have to say, I have a worksheet that you can download, and it's my Get Off the X worksheet. It goes through that REACT principle, and it can help you fill out, it can help you recognize I am in a crisis. It can help you fill out, go through those different principles, evaluate, assess, choose, communicate, take action. It also talks a little bit more about the Pentagon of Peak Performance. It also puts you on my newsletter, and I'm constantly trying to put out positive energy and help people be better. So, all right, I want to say thank you. If any of you are struggling, you are not alone. As a Navy SEAL leader, I struggled. I have friends who are Navy SEALs that struggled. The guy that wrote that book, Touching the Dragon, was suicidal and thrown in a psych ward. And finally, he came to grips with the fact that he was stuck on the X. And he finally got off the X and learned how to embrace and touch that dragon. Recognize you're on the X. It's never too late to get off of it. All right. Thank you.